All right, so this is 125, and we're nearly at the end of the semester. Everything's coming to the end. So today we're on Chapter 7. There's only one more to go. Chapter 7, Chapter 8, and that's it. I won't put any new material on the last day. So I just be here to answer any questions anybody has. So let's start talking about security operations. I remember when I heard about this chapter, I thought it just kind of reproduced a lot of material from other chapters. There's some overlap in these chapters, but anyway, you just have to learn all these concepts one way or another. All right, so administrative security. These are management rules and guidelines, to achieve the goal of security. Administrative controls, so here's some common ones. Least privilege or minimum necessary access. You don't give people any privileges that they don't need. Need to know. Even if someone is, say, an administrator, you don't make an administrator over systems that they don't need to have that power over. That's need to know. Compartmentalizing by their topic. Now, the military does this. And separation of duties is a strange word. When what it really means is that you have to have two people sign off on something. So somebody will do it, and another person has to inspect it and also sign off on it to approve it for it to go through. And you cannot get this job done without two signatures on it, essentially. There are people that just have checks where you have to have two signatures on the check or they're not valid, for example. And that's the point here. And the point of this is no one person could commit fraud or make a terrible mistake. They would have to run it by another person to get approval for high-value activities. And then both those people would have to make a mistake in order for a terrible thing to happen. All right. And I think I'll run this to the left a bit. Look better that way. All right, so a rotation of duties means people move from one job to another. You don't let them stay in one job forever. Yeah, core colluding, yeah. And this is one way to prevent fraud, so people don't develop some system of covering up what they do. Yes, Sir Golightly has a good point. I remember when I worked at an escrow agency and handled vast amounts of money, they always had every important transaction verified by a second person. He said, I don't want any one of you to be at blame, at fault if a bad thing happens. I want it to be spread around so there's not just one person that did it wrong. It's we as a company that failed. It shouldn't be one person taking the responsibility of doing some really important thing all alone without anybody to back them up. Anyway, forcing people to take vacations is common so that someone else has to take over for a while. So if they've been doing something systematically wrong, either so they because they're incompetent or because they are doing something nasty like finding a way to embezzle the money, then this will be found out when somebody else does that job for a while. Non-disclosure agreements are ubiquitous. Every time you get a job in this business, you have to sign one because you learn confidential information. You're going to know information about the company, information about the clients and the employees, and you can't be blabbing that everywhere. In other states, there are non-compete agreements, but not in California. And of course, background checks are again pretty much universal, sometimes also drug tests, where they just check to see if there's something obviously bad about you before they hire you. That's how they used to collect ATM money. Well, that would make sense. Yeah, you wouldn't want just one person collecting ATM money because then if they put it in their pocket, you wouldn't know. All right, so you have to monitor high privilege activities. Your network administrators, server administrators can do things like create accounts and such. And so you have to have some auditing of what they've done. So see what accounts they've been creating, rebooting services, looking at the source code and other files. Just check to see if they appear to be doing something they shouldn't be doing. And then forensics. If you have an incident, forensics is the activity of gathering the evidence and preserving the evidence and analyzing it so you can decide what happened. And sometimes this goes to court. Most often it doesn't go to court. Most often you just want to find the problem and fix it and move on. But sometimes you do, in fact, want to go to court and prosecute somebody. So you collect the evidence. There are techniques to hide evidence. Malware and advanced attackers can use malware that hides or even crashes your forensic tools, but it's not very common. Almost all modern forensics is done live. You don't just turn off the machine and take an image of the hard disk anymore. You take the live running machine image because you need to know about the network connections and the running processes and the contents of memory, not just the contents of the hard drive. So you typically collect evidence by running a process on the machine, which means you're altering it to some extent, that gathers the data off the machine. So, all right, that's called live imaging. So here's the phases. You identify potential evidence. This is like deciding that certain machines, you must take an image of them because you have evidence that they're involved in the incident. Then you acquire the evidence, and then you analyze the evidence, and then you produce a report saying what you found. So the most common I mentioned is live capture, where you run a program that collects all the data off the hard drive and RAM. They make binary images of all the storage devices, which is hard drives, RAM, USB drives, and whatever else there might be, and you make a complete image of that and save it, and then you work from that copy of that image. A complete image that copies every bit on the device is what you would like to have in the best case. Sometimes you have to settle for a less perfect analysis, but your gold standard is to get a complete binary image of the entire storage device, every bit on the device. And in that case, you will find allocated space. These are normal files that have file names and are currently in use. Then there's unallocated space, which is the space that is available for new files, and that will contain deleted files frequently. Then there's slack space, which is little bits, a few bytes of data at the end of clusters, usually too small to really be much of anything, never including complete files, but you might find some part of an email or something in there. And then there's bad clusters, typically ignored. The bad blocks are blocks where the drive had an error and it decided to quit using that block, but it still may contain some of the old data. So you might get lucky and find something useful in there, but the slack space and bad blocks are usually not worth much. It's the allocated and unallocated space that are useful for the active files that are in use and for the deleted files, which you can often reconstruct and look at. All right, so you make a binary backup with Norton Ghost, FTK Imager, Ncase, or many other products. Can make a complete copy of drive. You can just do it with DD on a Linux machine. All right, then there's network forensics, where you take network packets and analyze them. So this network intrusion detection is where you have, like antivirus, running, monitoring the network, looking for known bad things and blocking them or raising alerts. Network forensics is where you capture those packets, save them, and then analyze them. So everything would be in there. All your emails and file surfing and web surfing and everything will all be in there, although in a modern network, most of it will be encrypted with HTTPS. So that's why most large companies do intercept HTTPS with man in the middle and a proxy certificate, which they put in their browsers, so they can have the key and decrypt that encrypted traffic. If you don't have that set up, then you really can't reconstruct much of anything from modern web traffic because it's all encrypted and you don't have the key. So you get a binary file to analyze, and then you might want to analyze malware. What you're investigating involves malware, so unless your malware is on a known list of known malware, you have to figure it out. Do they use EtherCap? No, EtherCap is something hackers use. I don't think normal investigators use it. Companies doing man-in-the-middle just buy a hardware device, just like a router. They put it in the rack. You can buy them. That's usually how they do it. You have a hardware device that man-in-the-middle is the HTTPS, and you feed in a certificate. EtherCap is how you would do it, like in a coffee house, to attack the other users in the coffee house. It's not an enterprise-class tool that can handle large amounts of traffic. It's a good question. All right, so you reverse engineering malware, you disassemble it and debug it, run it in a virtual machine, and see what it does, and those are the techniques we cover in the malware analysis class. A lot of techniques to figure out what malware does. All right, and then you have embedded devices, SSDs and cell phones and such, handheld devices. You also capture the data from them and analyze it. In fact, phones are very important these days. Most people, all their life is on their phone, their email, their SMS, and everything. So gathering the data from a phone and analyzing it is often very important. So e-discovery is one of the legal forms of this. E-discovery is where the discovery process is when you get sued. You will get a discovery order from a judge that says you must hand over all the information about how you used Java for the last 7 years. This is what they went to Google with, because Google used Java in Android, and Sun sued and said, we own Java and you are using it in excess of the license and you owe us billions of dollars of license fees. And Google said, no, we don't. And they said, okay, we're going to court. So you have to gather together all the evidence about how you use Java and how you talked about your plans and everything for the last 5 or 7 years. That's discovery. This can be very difficult if you are not prepared for it, because your stuff is scattered across systems and old backup drives. If you become a large company, you actually run e-discovery software that constantly backs up and indexes everything so you can easily get it when you get a lawsuit. Because if you're a big company doing business in America, you just have a steady flood of lawsuits coming in. All right. And incident response is here. You prepare your company so you're ready in case an incident happens. Then you have detection. You detect a security incident. Then you have response. The first thing you do is contain the incident so it stops spreading, getting worse. Then you mitigate it. You stop the attack, stop whatever bad thing is happening. Then you have reports about what you've done, and then recovery to bring back up all the systems that have been taken down in the mitigation process, and then remediation, where you bring everything back to its original state of full function, and then lessons learned, so you can improve your response next time. That's the correct stages for incident response. Of course, immature companies don't do these very well at all. Like I said, most companies, small businesses, frequently don't even have any way to detect it at all. And, so they just sort of do what they can on the fly, but they're not as organized as this until you get to a higher level of maturity. So preparation, you train your staff, you have policies and procedures, you have tools, such as laptops intended to investigate network connections and do forensic analysis and so on. You have a checklist like this, determine whether an incident has occurred, prioritize handling it based on factors. Then you have containment, eradication, and recovery that goes on here. Then you have post-incident activities, so you have a sort of checklist of activities to do. This is the kind of structure you would likely have. So detection, you have some way to analyze events on your network, probably log files or something, to see if something bad has happened. And typically you do it with an SIEM system like Splunk, but there may be alerts coming from things like IDS systems. Then you have response. This is containment. The first thing you want to do is put out the fire. Whatever bad thing is happening, like malware is spreading or ransomware is encrypting stuff, you want to stop it from doing further damage. So typically you isolate, you turn off network connections, you turn off servers, things like that, to protect the clean part of the network from the dirty part where the bad stuff is spreading. Then, after you've stopped that, then you can make images of the systems involved and collect evidence from them to analyze it. This is, of course, going to interrupt business. You're going to be breaking networks in use and turning off servers in use, so that's why you had to go for a declaration of incident back here. When somebody decided this is a security incident, they have to be authorized to cause interruptions in business and expenditure of resources, because now you're going to go through this process. So, all right. Then mitigation, where you determine the cause, you clean up the systems, you have to figure out what caused the problem. If you don't succeed in figuring out the cause of the problem, when you try to fix it, it'll probably just come back again because you didn't really get rid of the bad guys that are hacking you or get rid of the malware or whatever the problem is. Then you have a report. You should be making notes as you go along. In preparation for the report, you will have a technical report that explains in technical details what you did, and you will have a non-technical report for the management, which explains in general terms what the significance of what you did is. As I move forward, I've become better at communicating with non-technical people. It is very important. The non-technical people are trying to steer the ship. They don't want to hear a bunch of binary gobbledygook. They want to hear, what harm did it do? How long is it going to take to fix? How much is it going to cost to buy something to stop it again? That's what they need to hear. Things that will help them steer the ship. Not every technical detail, but actionable business intelligence based on those technical details. Then recovery, restoring things back to operation and monitoring them to see if it comes back, because it is very often the case that you try to clean it off, but you don't really get it all, and it just comes back. And then remediation, where you fix the vulnerability so it can't happen again. You actually improve your security posture so that a person attacking with that attack would not succeed again. Putting on patches, putting on a better firewall, things like that. And then, of course, lessons learned. So you have to keep continuously improving just to keep up with the world changing, and especially if you want to improve your security posture. So you should be analyzing what you did, what worked, what didn't work, what changes you should make in your process so it gets better next time. A data science for the CISSP, yes, I would think so, sure. Yeah. You certainly could make that argument, absolutely. From what little I know about data science, I think it does show that it's that sort of big picture thinking, and that's what you need. Yeah. And so root cause analysis is necessary. You need to track down what really caused the problem, what vulnerability was exploited, how they got in. Lapsus is getting a lot of news these days. They hacked a lot of companies, and the way they get in is they just buy passwords from people. They just go on websites and say, I will pay you $100 for your password at this company. And somebody sells their password. Now they're in. That's a pretty devastating attack. It's not technically complicated, but that's pretty devastating. And really, if you're the manager, how would you stop that? How do you know that there isn't somebody on your staff that would just sell their password? That's a pretty scary thing. Anyway, but that's, you find your root cause analysis. And hopefully patch that, put in some kind of control so that same attack won't happen again. All right, let's try a Kahoot. 7A. All right. Well, hoping we get a few more than that. But I'll give it about 10 seconds and we'll see. All right, we shall carry on. These people are obviously going to win, but that way it's there for people that want to view the video later. Anyway. All right, so you're gathering evidence for a lawsuit. That's e-discovery. Good. All right, compartmentalization. That's need to know. That's what it is, the horizontal control. All right. Which one requires you to keep secrets? That's the NDA. Good. And writing IR policies. That's part of preparation. Yeah, you got it. Good. All right. Which one has a non-technical explanation? All right. The reporting, obviously. Good. and submitting a final report to management. That's in the postmortem. Good. That's going to include how you improve it for next time. Good. All right, and I assume the J there is Judy, and I know who DDD is. So you are the winners, of course. All right. We will carry on. So, preventive detective controls. So an IDS is detective, technically. It's not, they often include preventive measures in it as sort of a misnomer. But I mean, IDS is a detection system that will detect malicious things and then pop up alerts or something, and IPS would then prevent them by changing a firewall rule or something. You can have a network-based box that does this for your whole network, or you can have a host-based one that protects just that one device, and the host-based one then has the advantage of getting the logs off that device and such. It can, in principle, have more information. So you have your internet here. In comes a firewall to block the worst stuff, and then you have a network intrusion detection system up here that's reading all the traffic with a read-only line. IPSs are automated typically. And that's one risk of IPSs. You can trigger the IPS to create a denial of service condition. So that's why some people prefer IDS. Anyway, so your IDS is sniffing the traffic with read-only. So it's not sending any traffic, and it's not typically cannot be detected with a port scan or anything. You just make an image of the frames at layer 2, and then it can read here and see what's going on and record what's happening and detect when bad things are happening. And here's the IPS, which has to be in line. So if it fails, you're going to break the network connection. And now this one can, instead of just reading the traffic, it's in the middle and it can block the bad traffic if it doesn't like it. So it acts like a firewall, but like an adjusting firewall that looks through a set of rules. All right, so some of them have pattern matching, the simplest one, where it just has a certain pattern of packets, like an antivirus product. It can look for behavior, like errors in invalid kind of packets, or traffic that varies from a normal baseline. Those are various ways it can decide that something is suspicious and block it. SIEM systems correlate data, typically log data, but it can be anything. You forward any data from your firewalls and servers and everything to the central place where it can now analyze all those things put together. Continuous monitoring is now recommended. It used to be a system where you would check it every 3 years. Now you're recommended to just continuously monitor the data. Data loss prevention walks the data leaving your network to see if people are stealing secrets. So you look for things like social security numbers, confidential marks, whatever your marks are on your documents to indicate they're confidential, that you see things are leaving. Endpoint security goes on your laptops and other machines people are working on, antivirus, and many more things than antivirus these days. An endpoint security system will have application whitelisting, which should be called allow listing is now the preferred term, where it only allows certain things to run, limits what removable media like USB drives can be connected, and so on. All these things in one suite. Antivirus tries to detect bad software and block it. So you can do it. The most popular one just tries to list all the viruses and block known evil things, but lets anything not detected as evil run. It's more effective, but more inconvenient to use whitelisting or allow listing, where it only allows known good things to run and blocks everything else. This is more powerful, but it means you have to keep adding anything you want to run to the allow list. Removable media will stop people from plugging in unauthorized devices. On the old systems, like Windows XP, there was actually auto run, where it would run software as soon as you plugged in a USB stick, and that was too dangerous, and they disabled that long ago by default. Full disk encryption is what you need. encrypting just one folder is not good enough, because if you open things like Microsoft Office documents, they make temporary files in other folders. So the only kind of encryption that really protects your stuff is full disk encryption. And honeypots, you may add systems to your network just to attract attackers. This is perhaps to detect them, perhaps to get samples of malware. It never turned out to be extremely popular for just ordinary networks, but of course antivirus companies do it. But anyway, you can run a honeypot or even a network of honeypots to attract attackers in and make them waste time in there and give you a chance to detect them. All right. Your asset management includes configuration management for your firewalls and routers and servers and everything. You should have a record of your configuration, how you hardened them, changing them to be more secure than just a default install, and a baselining captures your security configuration. So if you need to set up a new server, you have the configuration information there. And all right. And patch management is a huge issue. At every company, you need to put on patches promptly, but the patches tend to break things, so there's quite a lot of effort involved in deploying patches in a test network and testing them first, and that typically means people are in fact very slow to administer patches. Yeah, honeypots and active defense. Yeah, there's a website up there about it. That's good. Yeah, it's quite an issue. Many people recommend it, other people don't recommend it. I think in practice, not too many people do it. And then vulnerability management. This will be scanning your systems to see if they have missing patches or have short administrator passwords or other things like that. So there are various products to scan for this. Microsoft used to make one that would scan your Windows system just to see if they have all the recommended Microsoft patches on them. If we're attacked by people with zero-day attacks, which are becoming more common, then of course there is no patch for that. Your only hope is general defenses like defense in depth that will hopefully help limit the damage, even though you have a system that is vulnerable. And change management, you have a change board which checks to see when you change things, rather than having people make dangerous changes like changing firewall rules or adding extra devices to the network. These changes have to be examined and approved and monitored so you don't cause security vulnerabilities or outages. All right, and so here's the steps of change management. You identify something that needs to change, like, some server is overloaded or something. You propose a change, then you assess the risk, you test it, you schedule it, and then you, of course, assuming that you get approval, of course, then you notify people that you made the change, you implement it, and then you report changes, results. All right. Let's take a look at another Kahoot. 7B. Aha. Aha. That's good. That's better. Now, if we can get above 3, there'll be an actual competition. But anyway. Well, these 3 people are all going to win, I think. But that's okay. All right. All right. So how do you protect PII from leaving? Yep, data loss prevention. Good. All right. Which defense correlates data from many sources? That's the SIEM, Security Information and Event Management System, like Splunk. All right, which one will block all unrecognized software? That's called whitelisting. The more modern term is allow listing. All right, and which one compares traffic to a baseline of normal activity? All right, that's anomaly detection. Good. All right, good. So, continuity of operations is planning for your IT systems to survive a serious disaster. Service level agreements determine what is acceptable performance, like the time to respond to a customer request or a broken equipment or uptime, something like that. And fault tolerance is a fault-tolerant network can survive a fault without having a failure. A fault is when something breaks, but a failure is when your customers no longer receive service. So if you have two servers that are sharing a load and one of them stops, that's a fault. But if the other one continues to provide service, it's not a failure. That's what you want. So fault-tolerant systems have redundant systems. So one broken device stops your customers from getting service. You got to have backups. Most common one is just a full backup of the entire drive. You could back up just part of it, like the data that has changed recently since the last backup or since the last full backup. If you use these partial techniques, it may take 2 or more tapes to recover backed up data, and you'd only do that if your systems are very large, so it's taking too long to make a full backup. And RAIDs are not a substitute for backup. RAIDs are a high availability solution, so your server doesn't go down. But a backup is a copy of the data off-site, so if the building burns down, you still have it. It serves a different purpose. It's disaster recovery. RAID is high availability to make sure it doesn't go down. So instead of just having one hard drive, you have an array of multiple hard drives, so if one of them fail, or sometimes even more than one, they will continue to work. So RAID 0 is the one that does not provide any fault tolerance. It's a striped set that just uses multiple drives to make reading and writing faster by putting some of the data on each drive so they can all be reading and writing at once. A mirrored set is 2 complete copies of the data, 2 identical copies of the disk. So if you want a 500 gig disk, you buy 2 500 gig disks, and they both have exact copies of all the data. And these other ones use parity, where they do not have 100% copies of the data on 2 disks. They have part of the data distributed across multiple disks. So mirroring is duplicating the entire data. Striping is just writing data to make it faster with no fault tolerance. And parity is where you take a block of data from several drives and XOR it together and put that calculated thing on another drive, so you have a sort of extra copy. You can use it to mathematically reconstruct the situation if any one of them fails. So that's the most common sweet spot, where it has high performance and it can recover from a failure, and it isn't as expensive as paying for a second copy of the disk, a second whole disk. So RAID 5 is the most popular. So RAID 3 has parity on a single drive. RAID 5 has distributed parity, where these parity stripes are all over the place. The idea here is you're removing one single point of failure, where if a drive stops working, one single disk platter, then you're okay. The others will take over. But of course, the entire RAID could fail. Your RAID controller could fail. And that's where you get up to, I don't know if they have it here, like RAID 10 and RAID 20, where you'd have 2 whole RAIDs. So, but yeah, the idea here is the most common failure is that one disk stops working, and it prevents you from having a single point of failure for that. All right. And so, yeah, here's the one. Striped set of mirrors. This way you get fault tolerance and higher behavior and so on. Is cloud better? Well, all the cloud is in fact running on this stuff. And you can put your stuff in the cloud, and all that's doing really is outsourcing this. All your cloud providers have to put their stuff on disk arrays so they can survive the outages. But yeah, moving your stuff to the cloud is one common way to outsource this. So then there's other redundancies. You can have redundant power supplies, redundant network cards, redundant disk controllers, just redundant entire servers, like 2 or 3 servers in a cluster. So high availability clusters are where you have multiple servers or any other device. So if one fails, it fails over to the other. Now this is a failover cluster where it has to have a heartbeat signal. And so if one of them fails, one server, the other server is supposed to detect that the heartbeat has stopped and it will take over. At City College for a while ago, we had a system like this with firewalls, but for some reason one firewall would fail, stop letting the traffic through, but it would continue to provide the heartbeat, so the failover didn't take effect. So that's annoying. The alternative is load balancing, where all the devices are being used all the time. It sends one customer request to this one, the next customer request to that one, and balances them. That way, when they're both working, you get high performance. When one of them fails, you get lower performance, but it doesn't have a heartbeat or a need to detect that there's been a failure. All right. And then, so you got business continuity plans and disaster recovery plans. The business continuity is how you ensure that your business can survive a major disaster, like what we just went through, a pandemic or a fire or a flood or anything like that. So you focus on protecting your business as a whole, how you're going to survive through some kind of disaster, and it will have multiple plans inside it, like the disaster recovery plan and other plans, in order to assure business continuity. The disaster recovery plan is specifying a certain disaster, like a fire or an earthquake, and how you're going to deal with that. So you have this business continuity plan, which is the big thing, and then you'll have all these things inside here, like a disaster recovery plan, a continuity of operations plan for your IT devices to keep them going, incident response, IT contingency, business recovery, crisis communications to communicate with the people, and occupant emergency plan to protect the humans. You know, how you're going to deal with injured people, with the building collapses, first aid kits, and way to transport them to the hospital and stuff like that. So maximum tolerable downtime is how you decide how to allocate resources. How long could you live without one of your business processes before it would threaten the business? Then you know which ones you have to fix first. So you can also sort your disasters by cause, like natural, human, or environmental. The most common, of course, being humans, the most common being insiders making mistakes, but it's not that common that their mistakes are so serious it causes a disaster. All right. And so here's a lot of examples: earthquakes, a strike, electrical fire, and all that stuff. All these bad things might happen, and you have to have plans for them. Errors and omissions is the most common thing, where your staff makes a mistake by doing something they shouldn't have done or by failing to do something they should have done. This is the most common thing that happens, although usually it doesn't lead to a disaster, but sometimes it does. And temperature and humidity is important in the server room. You can't let it get too hot or the servers overheat, and you can't let it get too humid or they corrode, and you can't let it get too dry or you have static electricity. You want to keep the humidity around 50%, and you must have reliable power, so you have to have uninterruptible power supply to give them a brief period of power, like 5 or 10 minutes when the power fails, and then a generator to provide steady power, which you can start your generator while the UPS is running. Or if you don't have a generator, you just use that 5 or 10 minutes to shut down all your servers. So here's all the disasters that might affect the survivability of your business. And of course, in a disaster like a tornado or something, you may lose the ability to communicate with people because the cell phone network is down. So you have to have a plan for an alternative communication system. So here's the disaster recovery. You respond to the disaster, activate your team, communicate to people that need to know. There's quite a few of them. Then you assess the damage that has been done and decide how you're going to reconstitute your business. You have a damaged building and you have to decide whether you can fix that building or you have to tear it down and build another one. So this is the initial assessment of damage. Decide if it's a disaster and whether your facility is safe for continued use. So you activate your team. It may be hard to reach them if the normal communication systems are down. And then send your team in. They will now perform a thorough assessment to determine the extent of the damage. And now bring things back in the order of necessity. Bring back things that have a lower maximum tolerable downtime. And of course, protect the safety of your people. Yeah, like the wildfires. Yes, exactly. Wildfires are a big one. And yeah, I got to see the AT&T disaster team. It was pretty impressive. I went and toured it with some students a few years ago, and they have a bunch of trucks with like cell phone towers and servers and routers all in trucks and a power generator and a medical trailer and a lunch trailer, and they just have a convoy of trailers drive into a disaster area and park in an empty lot, and they can set up everything you need right there. So reconstitution is getting everything running again. At the primary site or a secondary site, you may have to move to a different building and have a salvage team going back to like try to save what they can from the original site. All right, got another Kahoot. 7C. All right. All right. All right. So which disk array is not fault tolerant? RAID 0, that's correct. RAID 0 is faster performance, but it is not fault tolerant. All right, the most common source of disruption. Errors, obviously, far more common than those other things. All right, what kind of server cluster uses all the servers all the time? That's load balancing. Good. Keeps them all busy. And what plan deals with a specific disruption, like a fire? That's the disaster recovery plan. The business continuity plan is the overarching plan that includes all the disaster recovery plans for the various types of disasters. All right, and I am able to predict the winners somehow. All right. All right. And I see it's 5 minutes to 7, so let's take a 10-minute break. We'll pick up at 7:05 and then do some more of these.